Hello, everyone, and welcome to my review of the new Death Knight class. Obviously, we have not only a bunch of new cards to talk about with the release of March of the Lich King that is coming on December 6th, but we also have the biggest change that's coming to Hearthstone, which is the introduction of the Death Knight class. And Death Knight is super, super interesting from a design perspective. It is the first class in Hearthstone that kind of has its own deck building system, not just its own like cards and mechanics, but it uses a deck building system that is very different from every other class with the Rune system. The way that the Rune system works, in my mind, is fantastic. I really enjoy the fact that it creates more interesting and more granular decision-making process in Hearthstone deck building. I feel like my biggest complaint about Hearthstone deck building for a long time has been that it kind of is too simplistic. It's just, you pick a class, you put your cards in from that class, pick some neutrals, put those in, ta-da, good to go. But the way that the Rune system works is that you have 3 Rune slots that you can work with in any given deck. There are 3 different Rune types. So there are Blood Runes, Frost Runes, and Unholy Runes, and each card has sort of a rune threshold that your deck needs to be able to support. For instance, a card could be Blood Blood, which means that you could only include that card in your deck if you had 2 Blood Runes of the 3 that you chose. So you could have a Blood Blood card in a deck with a single Frost card, but you could never have a Blood Blood card in a deck with a Unholy card, or a Triple Blood card could never be in a deck with any Frost or any Unholy card. So overall, I really enjoy the depth that this feels like it will bring to Hearthstone deck building for Death Knights, and I'm really looking forward to experimenting with them in all kinds of different ways. Of course, with a new class comes a new hero power, and Death Knight's hero power is Ghoul Charge. 2 cost, not another 1 cost thing like Demon Hunters had, but 2 cost, summon a 1/1 ghoul with charge, it dies at end of turn. So this does a couple of things. One, it is obviously a way to just do some incremental damage, kind of like a druid or rogue or mage hero power, but because it is creating a minion, it is affected by taunt in such a way that the mage hero power is not. And also, crucially, it is giving you, a body that will die. And that's something that Death Knights care about a great deal. Death Knights also have a new mechanic called corpses that the hero power clearly synergizes with. Basically, they build up corpses over the course of the game with an indicator on the bottom of their screen, kind of under their mana bar. And they use those corpses for various effects. As we actually get into the cards, we'll see some of those effects. But the basic gist is Death Knights like having things that die, having a hero power that creates things that die, as well as has other applications. Is very synergistic to a lot of what they have going on, and is a very important component of what the class wants to do. Even just with things that we have seen, obviously Ghoul Charge, very powerful infuse effects that we saw from the last expansion. So, has a number of obviously self-contained synergies with the things that actually use corpses, but also can interact with things like Famished Fool, Sire Denathrius, Morlocula, things like that we have previously seen getting play in other classes. Obviously have a lot of possibility, potential for support in Death Knight as well. So there we go. Death Knight, cool new deck building ability, cool new mechanic, cool new hero power. And now let's check out some of the cool new cards. So our very first card that we're going to check out is, boom, Deathbringer Saurfang. These are in basically no particular order. They are just the order of the file names when I downloaded them from the card library on the Play Hearthstone site. So if this is not in an order that is necessarily coherent from a narrative or strategic standpoint, sorry, blame the file names. Anyway, Deathbringer Saurfang. We have a 5-cost 3/5 taunt. It is double blood runes with a death rattle. Return this to your hand. It costs health instead of mana. So the blood runes are very much about having access to a lot of like life steal, a lot of like tankiness, but not tankiness from armor like a warrior, but tankiness from effects that give you additional health, or again have life steal so you can restore that health. And also have tools like Deathbringer Saurfang to use that health as a resource. So, this is obviously relatively inefficient when you first play it. A 5-cost 3/5 taunt is pretty bad, but having a 5-cost 3/5 taunt, or rather having a 3/5 taunt that costs you life rather than mana, can allow you to make some pretty powerful tempo plays while you're using your life as a resource, and again, have a lot of other tools within the death runes for your Death Knight class, or rather blood runes for the Death Knight class, that allow you to restore that life and keep yourself afloat. So this card seems like it's quite powerful to me. Obviously, how powerful it is depends on how relevant a 3/5 taunt is in the metagame. Obviously, most of the time when you want to have a 3/5, around a 3/5 taunt body would be in the early game to defend yourself against small minions. But this could also just be something that is very effective against any kind of attrition style control deck, if those are a thing, or just any kind of aggressive deck where you use your other resources to kind of stay afloat. And this can keep coming down to stop either small minions or big minions from hitting you, while you use your other tools to deal with other stuff and keep yourself alive. So overall, pretty cool card, and worth noting that anything that allows you to cheat mana costs and use other things like your life as a resource can be extremely powerful, as we have seen in the past. So I do expect this card to see a significant amount of play and be a sort of cornerstone element of Blood Death Knight decks. Next up, we have Howling Blast. A 3-cost frost spell with a single frost rune required. Deal 3 damage to an enemy and freeze it. Deal 1 damage to all other enemies. So frost, as far as a sort of archetype is concerned, is largely about playing spells. A lot of the frost stuff cares about spells, cares about manipulating of mana crystals, and you can have some values from an effect like this that not only can buy it time, as far as freezing an individual minion, but can also be an AoE effect so that you can kill a wide variety of small minions. Just looking at this card, obviously, I think that it is not tremendously powerful. Like if you just look at it front, like compare it to say Frostbolt, which was a 2-cost mage spell from back in the day, though Frostbolt was fairly staple card, and crucially, compared to a lot of other freeze effects that we have seen more recently, this can hit heroes. So the ability to hit heroes with this, so that you can actually shut down, say, a demon hunter who's looking to punch you to death, or a infused axe from a enraged warrior, or things like that, can be a really big deal. And also against things like Imp Warlock, which are at least currently pretty popular, the ability to shut down an individual big minion from, say, Vial Library, as well as sweep off the small minions, is potentially a very big deal. So this certainly isn't like any kind of like crazy all-star, but it does have a lot of utility. And if you compare it to some other cards in the past, we mentioned Frostbolt, compared to Swipe, right? It's not quite as strong as Swipe in terms of the upfront damage, but has very much the same potential for clearing the board of small minions. Obviously, Swipe wasn't like an all-star card, generally speaking, but it was fairly crucial to Druid specifically because of how vulnerable Druid was to swarms of small minions, at least back before they had things like Spreading Plague or Scale of Onyxia. So Howling Blast, I think, is likely to be a sort of workhorse staple card, particularly in a metagame that does have swarm decks or decks that are looking to deal a lot of damage with hero attacks, because this can specifically freeze heroes. Next up, we have Anti-Magic Shell. This is a Unholy card. 3-cost, give your minions +1/+1 and can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. So this was, in a previous life, one of the Lich King cards, which were Death Knight cards that came off of the Lich King back in Knights of the Frozen Throne. It cost 4 and gave your minions +2/+2, but obviously was something that you could not rely upon actually having, given the fact that it was a random card that you would get from either the Lich King or from Arthas. So hardly something you could rely upon, but it was one of the things that could be extremely powerful when you did get it, because if you are playing a deck with a large number of small minions, which is the sort of thing that the Unholy runes can help provide, being able to both AoE buff your board as well as keep them protected from any kind of targeted removal can be a really big deal. So this is, I think, has the potential to be strong. Obviously, it sort of depends on what the metagame looks like as far as the sort of removal that people do play and the overall tools that are available for a more sort of go wide aggressive style of Death Knight deck. But in a metagame where there are a lot of targeted removal effects, this can be quite good at protecting your board. More likely, they're the sort of things that people tend to use against boards that go very wide tend to be AoE. So the fact that, if this is only +1/+1, unlikely to get small minions out of range of AoE in the form of, say, Deathborn or Blizzard, things like that, can make this a lot less effective than the previous Lich King version that was more expensive but gave +2/+2. So, very much a contextual card in terms of both what the tools that are available, which frankly I haven't gone through all of the neutral minions and such, so I don't have a full picture of what is available to Death Knight currently, mostly focusing on Death Knight itself. That's why I usually do these reviews at the very end of this, the whole release cycle, but there's just so much to do with all the new Death Knight cards that I wanted to get ahead of things. But yeah, I think this is a card that maybe in the previous life could have been powerful, but there's just so few sort of things, well, unlike other than the one that we just looked at that does target a particular minion and then AoE, as far as AoE that this would actually defend you from. So I think this is likely to be an okay card, but not likely to be a particular metagame breaker like the old anti-magic shell coming off the Lich King cards might have been. All right, next up, Corpse Bride. A 5-cost 4/4 with Battlecry sped up to 8 corpses. Summon a Risen Groom with stats equal to the amount spent. So this has no runes, so this is available to any Death Knight. One thing that is worth noting, any of the cards that summon a Risen thing, the Risen thing does not count as something that gives you a corpse when it dies. So they don't sort of compound upon themselves. There's not like an engine that continues to allow your corpses to feed your corpses when they do create Risen things. So I think this is a like pretty medium looking card to me. Obviously, like if you have a deck that creates a ton of corpses quickly, this can give you a 5-cost 8/8, right? Is at its best, and that's not bad, but it requires a lot of things to have happened up to that point to actually give you all of those minions. And obviously it does come with the 4/4 attached. So I think that the ability to generate corpses at that rate, as well as the ability of the metagame to handle large minions at that point in the game is really what will determine if this is a likely to be a powerful card. So it is at least better than, say, it was just a something which was a spell that spent corpses to create the Risen Groom, because at bare minimum you do get the 4/4 body. So if your opponent isn't capable of easily dealing with both of them, you're at least going to get some damage in. So I do think this is a card that has a decent amount of potential depending on what the sort of surrounding tools are. Next up, we have Blightfang. 3-cost 3/3 beast. Infect all enemy minions. When they die, you summon a 2/2 zombie with taunt, and this is a 1 Unholy Rune. This is a pretty interesting card, right? This is a card that is a 3-cost 3/3, which is obviously not great, but against any deck that has a significant number of minions of their own, against any sort of swarm deck, you are putting yourself in a position where whenever you kill their guys, you get not only a minion, but a minion with taunt. And those are not Risen zombies, so they do also fuel your ability to generate corpses. So, I think this is like quietly like a spreading plague-ish card. Obviously, it doesn't immediately solve the problem that you're facing if there's a board full of stuff. This by itself is not really going to do anything, but this, combined with a couple of trades, this combined, with some sort of AoE effect, can be extremely effective at not only answering your opponent's board, but also generating significant board presence for yourself. And I think that is a hallmark of a card that can be quite powerful. If you're playing against, any other deck that is looking to sort of swarm the board, whether it's another Unholy Death Knight, whether it's Imp Warlock, like imagine playing this against Imp Warlock and then AoEing their board, and suddenly, boom, you have, a ton of zombies out there. And consider, say, like Imp Curse Warlock, right? Say you play this, you kill their board, and then, they play a Abyssal Wave to kill all of these. Well, you just got a board full of like 7 things to get corpses. Maybe you play the Corpse Bride we just saw and make an 8/8, which is so much more difficult for their deck to deal with. So, I think this is definitely a card that on its face, obviously doesn't do anything immediately, but the power level of what it does in, a lot of contexts, especially, obviously metagame dependent, can be extremely, extremely high. And I think this is something of a sleeper card in this set. Next up, we have Dark Fallen Neophyte. This is a blood card. A 2-cost 2/5 with Battlecry. Spend 2 corpses to give all minions in your hand +2 attack. So we do see some hand buffing action here. Obviously, this is at its best if you do have minions that perhaps create additional copies of themselves. There is which we will eventually see. There is I believe it's an Unholy card that actually creates 2 copies of itself. Which pairing with any kind of buffs is extremely strong. Also, if you could potentially use this with things like Blade Master Samuro. You'll likely want to see if there's enough tools to actually create a hand buff deck, which you haven't seen work very well in the past. Typically, hand buff stuff we've only really seen like Rush Warrior have any success with conditioning and things like that as far as hand buff is concerned in the past. And a big part of that is that you really, when you are spending both cards and mana, actually building up your power level, with hand buffs, you need to have an immediate impact from them generally in order for that to actually be worth your time, outside of things like Keleseth, which obviously buff the rest of your deck too, and are incredibly low cost, coming down very quickly. This requires both the investment of having gotten the corpses, which is, in order to have this active on 3, you basically have to play a 1-drop, because you then have your 1-drop which dies, then you can perhaps hero power on 2, generate additional corpse, and then here you go, you have the corpses available to activate this in the 3rd turn, maybe curve out into the thing that triple buffs. That might be good enough, but again, that's asking for a lot of things to go right, and any of those individual cards aren't necessarily powerful on their own. So we'll see what the sort of other tools that are available that you might want to hand buff are, to see whether this is the sort of card that actually ends up being particularly appealing to play. Next up, we have Lord Marrowgar. This is a triple Unholy card, so can only be played in a deck that only has 3 Unholy runes, so shuts off your ability to play a lot of other stuff by including this in your deck. However, this is a 8-cost 9/7 Battlecry. Raise all of your corpses as 1/1 Risen Golems with Rush. For each that can't fit, give 1 +2/+2. So this is very powerful. If you have the ability to generate lots of corpses, which frankly Unholy is the rune type that does generate the most corpses, you can build not only a huge board, but a huge board that can immediately wipe out your opponent's minions as well. The question here really is how powerful is just, hey, a card that makes a big board answers your opponent's board. Are you in a metagame where it's very sort of tempo board dependent? Are you playing in a metagame where there's lots of sweepers where this isn't really going to do that much? But are you potentially playing this alongside things like Sire Denathrius, right? Playing a deck that is built to just have a lot of things die. Hey, this builds a huge board. Oh, they answer my huge board. Okay, well, Denathrius you for 1 million because so many things have died. So definitely feels like the sort of thing that leans toward the infuse plan as well, and is very, very powerful if you are looking to again play a board tempo game, and obviously also supports like the very powerful finisher we've been seeing and playing with for the entire period since Murder at Castle Nathria released. Next up, we have Lady Death Whisper. This is another triple Frost card. A 4-cost 4/3 with Death Rattle. Copy all Frost spells in your hand. As I mentioned earlier, Frost is very much about spells and spell comboing. A 4-cost 4/3 is obviously a pretty bad body, but having the Death Rattle of copy all your spells, if you have things that really care about playing multiple spells. Remember when the patch came out fairly recently, where they or rather at least the card library patch, where Ice Revenant was getting changed. It's because of stuff like this. It's because there are a lot of powerful Frost spells and a lot of powerful Frost spells that are very easy to play quickly and early alongside things like this that can allow you to generate so many more of them. So this crucially is a Death Rattle, right? You don't get to immediately get your Frost spells when you play this. It is either something you need to be able to kill yourself or potentially be vulnerable to a silence effect. How powerful this ends up being can have some sort of balance by how many silence effects or transform effects do exist in the metagame. But it does feel like the sort of thing that if there is like a Frost spell combo deck, and I assure you there is, just from looking at the card pool, having not actually played a game with anything like it, this does have a lot of potential to be an extremely powerful card in that style of deck. Next up, we have Graveyard Shift. So this is a 3-cost, 1 Unholy rune. Summon 2 1/1 zombies with Reborn. Remember how I mentioned that Unholy is certainly the best of the rune types for giving you access to corpses? Well, this is a 3-cost card that effectively gives you 4 corpses, right? You obviously don't get them immediately, but you do get 2 1/1 zombies that have Reborn, so you effectively get 4 bodies off of this. Obviously over the course of a couple of attacks, couple turns, whatever. But that corpse generation is likely to be something that not only like heavy Unholy decks are interested in, but also any deck that is specifically looking to use corpses as a resource is quite likely going to want to dip into Unholy for a card like this, simply because it is so efficient at what it does. You're not just generating corpses either. There are some cards that just effectively give you corpses. This gives you bodies. So you get to use them alongside your hero power or whatever else to chip away at your opponent's life total as well as your opponent's board, and then ultimately use them as a resource for your corpse payoffs later on. So I expect this to be a pretty common staple card. Obviously not quite as much immediate board presence as something like, say, Fiendish Circle, but does have more resilience to AoE effects, and more synergies with obviously undead things than Fiendish Circle does. So if you have things that care about undead and undead dying or whatever, this is extremely synergistic with all of that. It's not necessarily like an absolute power card, but it's something that does so many different things that I expected to see a ton of play. Next up, we have Bone Digger Geist. So it's a 2-cost 2/2 with Battlecry. Spend a corpse to get +1/+2. So this can be a 3/4 for 2. And again, I mentioned one of the previous cards that cared about corpses. I expect 1-drops for a lot of Death Knight decks to be something that are at like a pretty high premium. Simply because having things that can both potentially fight for the board in the early turns, as well as generate early game corpses, is extremely good for a lot of what the Death Knights want to do. Obviously, getting a 1-drop that dies to go with this on turn 2, really big deal. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these Death Knight decks were really, really thrilled to play like Trog or Peasant, right? Iron Deep Trog or Peasant are both things that, well, your opponent doesn't answer it, great. You have this thing that is giving you persistent value over the course of the next however long it survives. Whereas if they do kill it, cool, I got my early corpse, and I am in a position to be able to fuel something like this or many, many other things that care about having corpses early on. Next up, we have Heart Strike, a 1-cost spell. This has 1 blood rune. Deal 3 damage to a minion. If that kills it, gain a corpse. So, if you are looking at playing a deck that is looking to not necessarily be early to the board, but is looking to react early, here's another way to get access to early corpses, right? So this is, a very efficient removal spell overall. 1 for 3 is pretty strong. Obviously only hits minions, so it's not going to be something that you're going to finish your opponent off with. But does give you a corpse for killing something, and if you are playing any kind of deck that does have early use for those corpses, as I mentioned, anything that costs 1 is great because it can actually enable you to hit those effects that want corpses on curve, and I expect this in any kind of like mid-range control-y deck that is capable of playing blood to very likely see a good amount of play. Next up, we have Marrow Manipulator. 6-cost 5/5. Spend up to 5 corpses. Deal 1 damage to a random enemy for each. So this is this really Triple Frost? Triple Frost seems very strange for this card, but maybe it is. Regardless, this is obviously a very powerful effect, right? 6-cost 5/5 that can do up to 10 damage. But because it is Triple Frost, it doesn't have access to the corpse generation that comes in, say, Unholy or things like Heart Strike, what we just saw from Blood. So I think that, while this is a powerful card up front, it is using a mechanic that Frost does not have the easiest access to, because I feel like if my recollection of looking at the cards is correct, Frost is probably the worst at generating corpses. Unholy is by far and away the best. Frost feels like it does have a little bit more of a struggle. But crucially, if you look at this, it is spend 5 corpses, deal 5 damage to a random enemy, not a random enemy minion. So this can actually just be a finisher once you've used your various spells to kill your opponent's minions. Boom. This is just Pyroblast to their face if they don't have a board. So very, very powerful overall. And just a matter of whether you're actually able to hit those corpse thresholds easily while keeping up the sort of frost stuff you're looking to do. Instead, we have Death Strike. Remember when I was talking about how blood is good at removing things and keeping their life afloat? 4 cost, lifesteal deals 6 to a minion. So pretty big swing as that guy's making in the image, a big swing. But against any kind of aggressive deck, just like slurp, lifesteal 6 to that. Obviously, Void Shard is a card in Priest that 4 damage lifesteal that can finish a player off, but this is 6. Right, 6 that's a pretty big jump, both in terms of the actual life you gain, as well as the amount of, or rather the size of minions you're able to kill with it. So does feel like it has the potential to be a very powerful card in any kind of minion heavy metagame. Obviously, against more control oriented decks or combo oriented decks, this is the sort of thing that might just rot in your hand. You do have a hero power that can create minions, and they are minions that are going to die at the end of the turn. So if you are just looking to gain some life, you can always just use your hero power, Death Strike your minion if you are playing as a deck that's burning you out but doesn't have their own board. But this does feel like it's solid in the right metagame, but because it is minion only, is difficult to be really an all-star. And so we have Vicious Bloodworm, a 2-cost 3/2 battlecry. Give a minion in your hand attack equal to this minion's attack. Speaking of hand buff stuff. And specifically the hand buff stuff that we have seen, and it has all just been in blood, is attack buffs, not health buffs. Historically, looking at the things that have made hand buff type effects typically particularly strong, is that they have buffed the health of minions so that they are more likely to survive, both in removal, or rather in combat, and against removal. Vicious Bloodworm here, it can buff the attack on something, and does so while itself providing a okay body at least. But you're really going to have something that's getting pretty massive payoff from having that attack boost in order to really justify something like this in your deck. I feel like it is at least itself reasonably efficient. Maybe you have the curve of this into the 2/5. This dies, the 2/5 gets buffed, so you have a 3-cost 5/5, which buffs the rest of the stuff. Maybe this plays off of the other way. You hit the other one into this, you give massive attack boost to like your Samuro, that ends up being able to wipe your opponent's board. You really need to have things that have very big payoff, though, from attack boosts in order to really justify having things that are reliant on not only you playing these and having that be your investment in them, but also the chance that something like this specifically does land on them, because it is a random effect rather than a all your cards in your hand effect. Next up, we have Overseer Frigarda, 6-cost 5/6 battlecry. Draw 2 spells. If they're both frost spells, deal 2 damage to all enemies. So obviously, if you're playing a deck that is all frost spells, this is a 6-cost 5/6 that draws 2 and AoEs your opponent's board for 2. That's powerful, right? This is a pretty powerful effect that can help not only give you board presence, keep you alive, AoE, remove your opponent's board, damage your opponent because it does hit all enemies, but also give you resources. We have talked a bit about how Frost is very much sort of a spell combo style of deck that it leans toward, with things that are heavily of that rune. This is only 2 Frost runes, so this isn't necessarily something that you have to pair with only other Frost cards or spells, though obviously the effect itself really leans toward having you play all Frost spells, or at least a vast majority of Frost spells, in order to have it work effectively. If you look at this, you can compare it to, say, like the hero card Tamsin, right? Tamsin is a 6-cost hero card that draws you 3 cards, and AoEs for 3, but also affects your minions. So anything that compares at least remotely favorably to a card that already sees tons of play and is one of the better cards in the deck that it is already played in, I think has definitely some potential that you want to pay attention to. Next up, we have Skeletal Sidekick. This is a no rune card 1 cost 1/2 undead. Give a friendly undead +2 attack. That is something I actually did not mention earlier. If you did miss that during the reveals for March of the Lich King, undead is now a minion type. Many minions that were previously undead in their art or concept or whatever have been made into undead. There are also, in fact, things that are multiple card types, rather multiple minion types. So there's, undead beast, for instance. This is a little bit of a weird one because it is a 1-cost card that wants you to have another minion in play. So you can target yourself with the battle cry, actually. So never mind. Battle cries can never actually target the thing that is playing them because they have to be in play already. Otherwise, this would just be a 3/2 1-drop with upside. So not going to work that way. But yeah, this feels like it is a card that if there is like a hyper aggro undead deck, that has a lot of cheap undead that you can play it in, maybe it ends up being powerful there. Crucially, it does work with your hero power. The ghouls that you do make with your hero power are undead. So at 3 mana, you can always make a ghoul, buff it, get something for 3. That said, if something that really relies on synergies, either of having a lot of other cheap things or having things that are really valuable to buff, like say a Nerubian Egg style card, things like that. Overall, I think a relatively narrow card in terms of the decks that it's likely to show up in, but has the potential to be a strong role player in those. Here we do have an undead. Harbinger of Winter, 2 cost 2/2 with Death Rattle, draw Frostspell. Just a very strong card. We have seen things like Loot Hoarder see play in some form for a very long time. Obviously, no like superstar here, but a very solid role player in any kind of frost deck. A body that will give you a corpse and a frost spell. That is a cheap, not efficient minion, but not a terrible stats on it either. Just a totally fine card. Consider like Harbor Scamp, right? Harbor Scamp has been one of the strongest cards in any kind of pirate warrior deck for a very long time because it just gets kind of the glue that holds things together. This isn't something that will really stand out as, oh wow, this is the card that won me the game, but it is the sort of card that you're never sad to have in your opening hand because it's just kind of paying for itself in terms of drawing an extra card. And again, we mentioned that frost decks don't have that many effective ways to generate corpses, and this being something which gives you a card and a corpse when it dies, great. Next up, we have Acolyte of Death. A 3 cost 3/4, so Spider Tank stats, which are fine but unamazing these days. After a friendly undead dies, draw a card. So as I mentioned just moments ago, your hero power does generate undead. So this is a very reasonable card draw mechanism alongside that. Or if you are playing sort of an undead swarm style deck, this could be a good way to reload. It is single frost rune, so you can't use this alongside, say, the triple undead, or rather triple unholy runes that really want you to have swarms and swarms of undead. But say you're playing an unholy frost deck, this is a very powerful way to churn through your deck when you're playing your reborn zombies from Graveyard Shift or really anything else. But just in that case, obviously wouldn't have access to any of the triple rune things. So, and again, one of the reasons that I feel like the Death Knight rune system is so interesting and so effective for making deck building just a more challenging, more compelling thing. Next up, we have Frostmourne. So Frostmourne was one of the Lich King cards that you could previously get from Lich King or Arthas back in Knights of the Frozen Throne. And it survived unscathed. Now this is just a card you can put in your deck if you are playing Death Knight. 7 cost 5/3 weapon. Death Rattle, summon every minion killed by this weapon. This card's cool, right? It has no rune requirements, so it can go to any Death Knight deck. And it was a very powerful card, at least back then. That you could get off of Lich King. Obviously, the game has changed a bit, and just being able to steal individual big minions, or several minions, isn't quite as powerful as it once was because there's more sort of ways to win that are not simply running your opponent out of resources or just getting a big board. But that said, I think that with what we have seen for specifically Blood, it feels like Frostmourne has some potential because Blood Death Knights, with the amount of healing they have, the amount of life steal, the amount of additional health they can gain, things like that, can effectively use Frostmourne to smash into opponents' minions and steal them and just heal back up. So that is, I think, probably if we do see Frostmourne see any meaningful amount of play, I think that's the most likely place it will be in heavy blood decks, whether double blood or triple blood. There are also cards that can enable you to find this card from your deck that can potentially mean it is more likely to see play, because there's the forget the name of it, but there's a 1-cost card that you can spend you draw a weapon from your deck and you can spend a corpse to reduce its cost by 1. So getting Frostmourne down on turn 6 is definitely quite powerful. Next up, we have Chill Fallen Baron. This is a 3-cost 2/2, Battlecry and Death Rattle, draw a card. So no runes, and this is obviously not particularly efficient from a stat perspective, but it's kind of your arcane intellect in Death Knight. It doesn't give you the cards right away, but it comes with a 2/2 body and gives you a corpse. So I feel like this is something that we'll see a lot of play, simply because it does a lot of things that any kind of control or mid-range style of Death Knight deck is likely to want. And again, having no rune requirement does mean that it can fit into literally any Death Knight deck. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is one of the most played Death Knight cards for that reason, simply because it's kind of an every part of the buffalo sort of thing. As well as being able to fit into any of the decks, whereas lots of other Death Knight cards have kind of competition from a rune perspective. Next up, we have Hematurge, 2-cost 2/3. Battlecry, spend a corpse to discover a blood rune card. It is a 2-blood rune card itself. Blood, is not necessarily the rune type that does have the best ability to generate corpses. But this is a pretty powerful way to spend corpses. This is a 2/3 that is just discover a blood rune card. Specifically, the blood rune cards are going to be more powerful generally more powerful than the no rune requirement cards. So it's a little bit better in some ways than just discover a Death Knight card. So this is just, I think, a very, very, very solid card. Obviously, again, blood does need to manage its corpse expenditure more than, say, Unholy does. But this feels like a very, very good way to use them in order to give you the ability to generate those, not just card advantage, but also card selection that can be very powerful, especially with blood looking to play longer games thanks to the amount of life steal and life gain it has. Next up, we have Bone Guard Commander, 8/8 taunt. Undead, 1 blood rune. Battlecry, raise up to 6 corpses as 1/2 risen footmen with taunt. That is a lot of defense. And, they are risen footmen. Again, one of the important things to note, anything that does require corpses that creates something risen does not give you corpses back when they die, so they can't fuel themselves. But, this is a very powerful defensive tool against any kind of deck that's looking to, actually attack you. Whether it is, with small minions, whether it is, with, hero attacks, anything like that. And it is only 1 blood. So, this does seem like the sort of card that is unlikely to see play in a really heavy blood deck because they don't have necessarily the powerful corpse generation. But perhaps in a deck that is unholy blood, this is a way to really powerfully fuel, say, Denathrius. We've talked about this for a lot of the Risen stuff before. Be able to fuel Denathrius with a ton of charges, as well as just present like a really dangerous board for your opponent to deal with. The ability to make a big board, maybe buff it with, say, Anti-Magic Shell. Obviously you can't do that in the same turn. Because that does cost 3, and that was Unholy, right? Sometimes that is one of the challenges of Death Knight is like, hey, can you play this card with this card and this card? You got to remember the details of which the runes are. But yeah, does seem like it has potential in that style of deck. Again, certainly not something that is super powerful in a super heavy blood deck because of the difficulty in generating that many corpses. But would pair very well with Unholy. Next up, we have Ymirjar Frostbreaker. Ymirjar. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that remotely correctly. But anyway, 1-cost 1/2. Battlecry, gain +1 attack for each frost spell in your hand. Only a single frost with it. But, this does open up the possibility for more sort of aggressive style of, frost deck. Talking a lot about how Frost kind of naturally lends toward being more spell-based combo. This being, a card that can give you sort of a more powerful proactive strategy for against decks that are, not necessarily easily able to remove an early minion. This could very readily be like, a one cost 5 power minion, right? Or a one cost, you know, 10 power minion with a full hand of frost spells. Boom. This is, I think, an interesting style of card, because most of what we have seen for Frost, most of what we've been sort of told Frost is sort of this more sort of spell combo thing, and having at least the option for a more sort of aggressive style of deck, I think is pretty interesting. So I don't expect this to be necessarily like a heavily played card, but I think that there will certainly be decks that want to experiment with things like this and play more of a pressure Frost deck alongside their card draw and such. Next up, we have Possessifier, a 5-cost 3/3 for 1 Unholy Rune. Battlecry, summon 2 1/1 fighters with Rush and Reborn. So again, Undead, definitely the place to get your corpses. This actually feels like a pretty powerful card. You are spending 5, you're getting a 3/3, you're also getting 4 damage worth of Rush that gives you 4 corpses. In a matchup where you are playing against any kind of minion-based deck, you're getting a lot of value and tempo off of this. Obviously, it is not by itself like the best thing you could do from a Rush perspective or anything like that, or unlikely to be the best thing you can do from a corpse utility perspective, but does feel like the sort of thing that can help fuel a lot of other things while giving you time to build up to them. So it kind of feels a little bit unassuming looking at it, but I think that this has the potential to be a pretty solid card in a lot of different decks that care about having a lot of corpses at their disposal. Next up, we have Plague Strike. It's a 2-cost shadow spell, 1 Unholy Rune. Deal 3 damage to a minion. If that kills it, summon a 2/2 zombie with Rush. This card seems very powerful. Obviously, it is minion only, but this is a extremely strong tempo card in any kind of minion-based matchup. It kills one thing, gives you a body. It's not a body that's going to die at the end of turn or anything. It is going to give you very often just 2 costs, kill 2 of your minions and generate corpse. So that is, I think, a extremely powerful card in a metagame that does have a significant number of inexpensive minions. Obviously, the metagame is a bunch of control and ramp decks. This card's going to be pretty bad. But in the context of any kind of minion-based metagame, this card seems fantastic. And assuming that we have a relatively minion-focused metagame, I think this will see a lot of play because it seems super good. Next up, get him a body bagger. 1 cost, 1/3, Battlecry, gain a corpse. It is a no rune card, so this is something that I mentioned a lot about how I felt like having cheap things to generate corpses could be really important for certain decks. This one specifically, obviously can go into any deck and can theoretically give you multiple corpses. I feel like this is the sort of thing that you either are playing a deck that really wants early corpses, or has a ton of card draw to be able to justify having cheap things that are mostly used to just generate corpses. But even just a 1-cost 1/3, right? Like in a world with lots of cheap minions like peasants and things, is very good at dealing with them as well. So it does seem like a stronger card than it might appear at first glance. Next up, we have Necrotic Mortician. 2 Unholy Runes, 2 cost 2/3, Battlecry. If a friendly undead died after your last turn, discover an Unholy Rune card. So this wording is a little weird, but this is kind of one of the things that goes with a lot of undead. They care about things having died after your last turn, which basically means on your current turn or during your opponent's last turn. This is another card that is, I think, likely to be quite strong. We saw the Blood version, which I think spent a corpse, right? And this one, is in Unholy, which has a lot of things that have the potential to die. Getting the ability to generate additional Unholy Rune cards, for a pretty trivial cost, I think is likely to be a pretty strong card in a lot of those decks. Next up, we have the Scourge. 9-cost shadow spell, double Unholy Rune. Fill your board with random undead. I doubt this is going to be a good card. 9 is a lot. There's a lot of very weak undead. This can be a bunch of like 1/1s, 2/1s, whatever. I feel like you're obviously you are getting what are likely to be a number of things that will have death rattles, because undead have a lot of death rattles. Also, you are giving yourself a ton of corpses. You're playing Unholy, so you already likely have a lot of ways to generate corpses. It is it's a cool card for sure, but this feels like it is unlikely to be a card that really sees very much play. I like that it exists. I like that it's like, hey, rally to me, the Scourge, like, rally around your Lich King. But this is one of those cards that I think the most likely time you're going to see it is when it comes off of Jackpot in a rogue deck. Next up, we have Meat Grinder. One rune cost, Unholy. 3 cost, 3/4. Shred a random minion in your deck to gain 3 corpses. So speaking of ways to really efficiently gain corpses, this is a very easy way to get corpses that if you want them right now. Obviously, this is a card that doesn't want to be any kind of combo deck that cares about having specific minions, because it will eat a random minion. So if your deck relies on having some specific thing, probably not the best inclusion. But yeah, I think this is not likely to be a like that card that goes into every deck. But if your deck really cares about corpses, this gets them very efficiently without even having to worry about things dying. Right, you're just getting them right away. Lots of the other things we talk about for corpse generation are things it's like, yes, this generates multiple bodies and you can trade off those bodies and then you get corpses. This is just like, nope, I got my corpses. As sort of a tempo thing, the fact that this is at least okay stats, right? 3 cost, 3/4, not amazing, but not horrific. And the fact that it doesn't require your minions to die does mean that, I think this is a very reasonable option for decks that really want fast corpse generation, but probably won't see play elsewhere. Next up, we have Rime Sculptor. 5 cost, 3/3. Battlecry summon 2 Rime Elementals, 2/1s, with Death Rattle, deal 5 damage to a random enemy. Or 5 damage, 2 damage to a random enemy. I'm really getting ahead of myself. It's 5 cost, not 5 damage. This is, I think, like, kind of mediocre, it feels like, right? You're getting, like, okay combination of stats and stuff because of the Death Rattle. It is something that is, is 1 Frost Rune. It is something that's generating multiple bodies for 1 card, which can be corpse generation for Frost, which is not something that necessarily has great options for. My feeling is unlikely that this is a good card, right? We've had many cards in the past that are like mid-sized body that generates 2 small bodies. These do have the Death Rattle effect, but doesn't really feel like it is likely to be good enough at 5 costs to just generate 3 small bodies. Obviously, the ability to generate more corpses can be relevant because Frost doesn't necessarily have the best ways to generate corpses. But again, there's a lot of options in neutral that if that's what you really are going for, you can probably find something that's less expensive to give you that amount of bodies. Next up, we have Dark Transformation. 2 cost spell for 1 Unholy Rune. Transform an undead into a 4/5 undead monstrosity with Rush. So worst case scenario with this is hero power into this and you get a Rushing Yeti, right? So this is kind of, at its worst, a 4 cost Rushing Yeti. Obviously, Rushing Yetis are not necessarily something that I don't know if that sees play much of the time. It is a transform effect, so it's not going to generate corpses on its own. But it seems pretty powerful, right? You if you have a body in play already, this can be something that you can get really inexpensive Rushing Yeti out of the body. You do also get the 1 to face if you do transform your corpse ghoul charge into corpse charge. Ghoul charge. It's ghoul charge that makes corpse, not corpse charge. So yeah, this feels like it's like a reasonably powerful effect in a world where you are really interested in that kind of board control. The question I don't think is this a card that is strong enough. It's just like, what does this go into? What's the deck that really wants to play a card to do this? One interesting thing is that this does say transform an undead, not an opposing, or rather a friendly undead. So you could theoretically use this on an opposing undead if they have a huge undead minion that you are kind of out of ways to remove. Maybe it's some big undead with a big death rattle, and you're like, all right, now that's a 4/5, and I'll kill it. So that's kind of a what feels like probably a corner case use for it. The biggest question is like, where does this go, right? Like, this isn't a card that you like really build a deck around. This is a card that would be incredibly powerful in Arena, right? because it's all about just slamming bodies into each other and trying to get, some form of board advantage. And this does feel like it's good at that, but it isn't particularly synergistic with like other stuff. And that's why I kind of question whether this is likely to be that popular a card. And Leetry Jenkins, I do see it. Thank you very much for the 77 months. Next up, we have Plagued Grain. 1 cost, gain 4 corpses. Shuffle 4 crates into your deck, summon a 2/2 undead when drawn. So this is a triple undead card, or unholy card rather. And we're talking about, you want to generate corpses? Well, this is like the best way to inexpensively generate corpses. This is going to give you tons of corpses very quickly, and if you churn through your deck, will give you more cards that that are like cast when drawn, make an undead. So this feels like, if you are looking to just do the corpse thing, obviously this is going to be a staple in any kind of triple unholy deck that is looking to do that, which is probably going to be most triple unholy decks. So I do expect this to, be a card that is a staple of those. As to whether those are decks that you want to play is another kind of question, right? Triple Unholy has the best corpse generation, but doesn't necessarily have the best payoff for corpses because it is so easy for them to come by. So we'll see if Triple Unholy, actually is something that has enough power to justify actually playing it over the other options. Next up, we have Rune Forging. I mentioned this earlier. 1 cost shadow spell, draw a weapon, spend a corpse to reduce its cost by 1. So, if you do want to play a deck that is looking to play a cheap Frostmourne or a cheap Corrupted Ashbringer, which we will get to, this can go into any deck. This is not a card that requires any runes to play. It gives you easy access to tutor weapons from your deck, and obviously gives you a way to spend corpses to make them more efficient. This is a card that isn't necessarily amazing now, but is something that you want to keep an eye on as additional Death Knight cards are revealed. If there are any individual weapons that are super strong, or if there's any particular like deck that uses one of the weapons that does exist super well, Rune Forging does make that even more powerful than it otherwise would be by giving you a lot more access to it and giving the ability to reduce the cost efficiently. I see the question, you have the option to not spend a corpse? No. Anything that triggers off of corpses, it automatically spends your corpses if you have them. Next up, we have Repulsive Gargantuan. 4 cost 3/6. Enemy characters can't be healed. So that's gross in certain matchups. That is, something that against, say, Priest, right? If decks that, are heavily focused on, using things like Gift of the Naru or, Desperate Prayer and things like that, that's going to be it's gonna be pretty rough for them to beat. This is actually weirdly an extremely powerful card against, say, the Boar Priest. When I was playing Boar Priest, it's like, haha, your Zarellas don't work. Your Pyromancer plus Northshire Collect doesn't work. Your Reno doesn't work. This is just an interesting answer for those specifically. Right now, I don't feel like there's like a ton of classes or a ton of decks that are super reliant on healing, but I do think it is, pretty interesting to have this as an option for Death Knights if there are heavy healing decks and classes that do end up becoming popular. It doesn't stop Denathrius. It mitigates some of what Denathrius does. Next, we have Bone Breaker. After hero attacks a minion, deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. So we talked a little bit about the aggressive options for Frost. There was the minion that gained attack for each Frost spell in your hand. This is, Bone Breaker. After hero attacks a minion, boom, you get to do some face damage as well. So the Smork element of Frost Decay getting a little bit more power there. A 1 cost 2/2 weapon is just super efficient, right? Like that's one of the biggest things. Even without the game text, 1 cost 2/2 weapon is, actually something that in a class, unlike Rogue, right, where Rogue has Cutlass that it just always wants to trade, it's actually a very good weapon against any kind of deck that is looking to play small minions, as well as a reasonably efficient way to just damage your opponent because it's 4 for 1. So definitely a card that's worth keeping an eye on if those style of decks look like they're have the tools to be popular. Next up, we have Obliterate. This is another card that just went straight from being a Lich King card to being a Death Knight card you can put in your deck. 2 cost 1 Blood Rune. Destroy a minion, your hero takes damage equal to its health. As mentioned many times already, Blood has a lot of lifesteal. It has a lot of tools to gain life, keep itself afloat. So this is a really efficient removal spell that you can very easily get the health back from the cost. It really, if there is a metagame where there's, just sort of big things, little things, minion heavy metagame, Obliterate feels like it's very likely to be a very popular card simply because it's such an efficient removal spell that can handle whatever. And, as long as your opponent is not playing a super heavy Smork deck, and if they are, you're probably using this in a small minion. This does seem like it has the potential to be very strong, very popular card. Only one blood rune, so it can go into a lot of different decks, but seems most likely to be played in heavier blood decks because they have access to the most ways to keep their health up. Next up, we have Stitch Giant. 10 cost 8/8. Costs 1 less for each corpse you've spent at this game. So we talked a bit about the various payoffs for undead, rather Unholy, and their corpse generation. Well, this is not just a payoff for corpse generation. This is a payoff for corpse payoffs. So this is an interesting card because, you can have a million corpses, but if you don't have any way to actually use them, or enough ways to actually use them, well, this is going to be hard to use. But, we have seen, obviously, a lot of things that do use those. Obviously, Lord Marigar, the extremely powerful one, or at least extremely high impact one. And this is likely to be, I think, a really important card in Unholy heavy decks. It is only double Unholy, right? Which is a really big deal because you can be playing a double Unholy deck that uses, say, Blood or Frost, and those rune types, those decks have more powerful payoffs because they have more difficult time generating the corpses than Unholy does. So this, can go into a really heavy corpse generation triple Unholy deck, but can also go into a deck that splashes one of the other rune types and has more powerful ways to utilize those corpses. So definitely a card that I think is absolutely going to be a powerful tool for any kind of heavy Unholy deck in Death Knight. Next up, we have Battlefield Necromancer. 2 cost 2/3 at the end of your turn. Raise a corpse as a 1/2 Risen Footman with Taunt. This is, I think, obviously a very powerful way to, use your corpses in the early game if you want to play an Unholy deck that is, say, using Plague Drain, right? Plague Drain to this, you have a minion that is effectively, giving you 3 power and across 2 bodies that your opponent needs to deal with right away, or is just going to keep generating more. They are Risen Footmen, as we mentioned many times. They themselves will not fuel, your Necromancer, so you don't kind of have infinite as long as your opponent kills them, but you have a hero power that makes more corpses. So I think this is a quite a powerful card for a proactive Unholy deck. Only 2 runes, so it can also be played alongside the other rune types. Does feel like having the early corpse generation like Plagued Grain is something that this card obviously wants to have, because without any kind of corpses, it is just a River Crocolisk for 2, and that's a lot worse. So again, pairs very well with Infuse cards. In particular, being able to get this out early and then follow it up with, say, a Famished Fool or a Rolocula, or have it fueling your Denathrius, which you're going to kill your opponent at the end of the game with. All really powerful uses for that, on top of just the fact that, hey, you're swarming your opponent and you might just kill them. Next up, we have Blood Boil. Double blood, 5 cost, lifesteal. Infect all minions the end of your turns, they take 2 damage. So this is a weird card, right? It is a 5 cost AoE that doesn't kill the stuff right away, but can kill it over turns. And it has lifesteal, so if your opponent has a bunch of minions, this can possibly even make it so that you want their minions to stay in play, so you're like humping them. This is end of your turns, not just the end of this turn. So if they have a bunch of medium-sized things, you can Blood Boil, and they keep attacking you with those medium-sized things, and then they keep taking the damage, and then you're just keeping yourself afloat with this. This card feels super powerful, right? This isn't just an effect like, deal 2 damage to all your opponent's stuff, lifesteal that you keep gaining life off of this effect as long as those minions stay in play. So, I feel like this is one of the strongest tools in a Blood Death Knight's arsenal, for not just dealing with the board, but keeping your life up to be able to pay for those various life costs. So it is a weird effect, right? It is like, it says it has lifesteal, but you know, like it's creating an effect on the opposing minions that also has that lifesteal effect. But yeah, this can heal you immediately for 14, and then the next turn for, you know, another 14 if your opponent still has a full board that is still afflicted by all the blood boil stuff. So, you know, it doesn't have any cast requirement, corpse requirement, anything. I think it's just a super, super strong card that is going to see a ton of play in any kind of blood control deck. Next up, we have Icy Touch. Deal 2 damage to an enemy and freeze it. Remember Frostbolt? Well, this is Frostbolt now. Costs 1. Notably, deal 2 damage to an enemy. So this is not a minion-only effect. So you can use this to freeze your opponent if, say, they are attacking you with weapons. Yeah, this is just a, I think, very, very strong card. No rune requirements. So this can go into any Death Knight deck. Obviously, given that it is a cheap Frost spell, and you know, as we've talked about, the Frost Death Knight is very much about spell combo-ish stuff. Very likely to find a home there. You know, if you were wondering why Icy Revenant was nerfed, cards like this are certainly in the ballpark of things that would allow you to just blow your opponent up with an Ice Revenant on like turn 5. It is a little bit surprising to me that this doesn't have a rune requirement. You know, given that it is just a cheaper and almost as powerful Frostbolt, but yeah, powerful card. Expected to see a good chunk of play. Certainly going to be a staple in every Frostbolt deck, I imagine. Next up, we have Might of Menethil. 4-cost 4/2 weapon. Battlecry, spend up to 3 corpses, freeze that many enemy minions. So this is basically a weapon that Cone of Cold's your opponent, right? Obviously, you need to have the corpses, but you know, it doesn't have to be 3 corpses. If you have 1, you can still get a freeze effect. If you have 2, you still get a freeze effect. I am curious, my guess is that this will not spend excess corpses if your opponent only has a fewer number of minions. If your opponent has 1 minion, they probably won't spend 3 corpses if you have them. But yeah, this is, you know, going to bonk your opponent over the face with this mace, and you know, keep your opponent's stuff frozen while you beat them up. You know, we talked earlier, you know, throughout the review so far about the effectiveness of the sort of aggro Frost decks, and you know, this is something that can, you know, give you a little bit of breathing room against opposing minions to get that damage in the face. 8 damage for 4 mana, you know, over the course of 2 turns is powerful if you're looking to burn your opponent down. As to whether, you know, this is that sort of shell of like aggro Frost is likely to be good enough, again, unclear. But, you know, definitely a card like this is the sort of thing that can buy you the time against other aggressive decks and allow you to actually get that beat down in. Next up, we have Death Chiller. 2-cost 2/3 elemental. After you cast a spell, deal 1 damage to 2 random enemies. This is a 2-cost Flamewaker, although it does say 2 random enemies, so maybe it's not. Maybe this can't hit the same thing. It's worded differently than Flamewaker, so it can't hit face twice. Yeah, it's not Flamewaker. I went through, you know, a sequence of thoughts there. I was like, oh god, 2-cost Flamewaker. Wait, no, not 2-cost Flamewaker. As I reread it. So, yeah, if you know, you are playing against an opponent who has no minions, this is every time you cast a spell going to be 1 to them. If they have a minion, whenever you cast a spell, 1 to them, 1 to the minion. As far as, you know, Frost goes, we've talked a lot about spell combo. We've seen the triple Frost minion that copies all your Frost spells in hand. It's not a lot of cheap, efficient minions. This is certainly the sort of thing that, you know, can give you the ability to clear off opposing, you know, small minions in the opposing board, as well as, you know, burn your opponent down. Not quite as quickly as the Flamemaker could, thank God, because certainly wouldn't want that at 2-cost, but definitely has a lot of potential, both as board control and as a finisher. Next up, we have Soul Stealer. 8-cost 5/5. Battle Cry, destroy all other minions, gain 1 corpse for each enemy destroyed. This is Twisting Nether plus. This Twisting Nether with a 5/5 body that gives you corpses. It's not legendary, so you're going to play 2 of these. So this feels like a really good reason to play Triple Blood. You know, we talked about a little bit earlier, Triple Blood, you know, likely to be a very heavy control style deck, because it does have, you know, those various ways to bolster its health, has those ways to leverage its health. This is the way to just, you know, kill all your opponent's stuff. And yeah, obviously very powerful card. If we are in a world where it's a board focused metagame, likely to be super super strong. Obviously, again, it is a triple blood card, so it does cut you off from a lot of other powerful cards. So won't see nearly as much play as the lower rune requirement cards, but I do expect this to obviously be a must play staple in any kind of triple blood deck. Next up, we have Thasarian, 4-cost 3/3 Reborn with Battle Cry and Death Rattle. Deal 2 damage to a random enemy. It's kind of a weird card. You're getting just a bunch of like off of it. It is a frost card that can give you multiple corpses and do like the incremental blast damage. But yeah, so ultimately you do end up getting 3 shots off of this. You get 1 shot when you play it, 1 shot when it dies the first time, then it reborns. You obviously don't get the battle cry when it reborns, but you do get the death rattle. So this just seems like it's like a reasonably efficient minion if you are care about those shots. It is giving you multiple corpses, which is relevant, especially considering it is a frost card and you don't necessarily have the best corpse generation if you are playing a heavy frost deck. But yeah, this feels a little bit weird to me just as like a legendary, right? It doesn't feel like it's doing anything super cool. It's just like kind of a combination of like, a bunch of keywords that work well together with the ability, which is fine. You're basically getting like, compare this to like Cold Case, right? Obviously that's a mage spell, not something available to Death Knights, but you're getting, rather than getting the armor, you're getting like 1 more shot and like you have initially a 3/3 body. It's kind of comparable, but again, it's a legendary. So I do think that it's probably just like a good enough combination of stuff that it will see play, because again, stuff like Cold Case obviously does. But obviously that's giving you armor and giving you survivability and is just kind of in a different context. But does seem at least solid enough to see some play, but it doesn't feel like an all-star to me. Next up, Patchwork. Patchwork is sweet. A 7-cost 4/6. Destroy a random minion in your opponent's hand, deck, and battlefield. If you're looking for powerful control tools, this is a nutty card in a lot of ways. We're talking about how blood is very likely a heavy control rune. This, this controls their board, it controls their hand, it controls their deck. If you have ways to generate additional copies of this, if you like Bran it, Patchwork want to play. Definitely going to be a very popular card because it is only 1 blood rune. It will fit into a lot of different decks. So, people are going to hate this, but I love it. More ways to disrupt your opponent's, OTK type strategies, more ways to, just get them. Next up we have Alexandros Mograine. 7-cost 7/7. For the rest of the game, deal 3 damage to your opponent at the end of your turns. So this is a war golem that, burns your opponent to death forever. So this is triple blood. So obviously not a card that can see a ton of play in a lot of different decks. But this is interesting because, this is a way that you can kind of just chip away at your opponent forever. If their opponent doesn't have healing, this is going to end the game pretty quickly, right? And obviously the body is not great. It's obviously a pretty weak body, but if you're playing like a heavy control deck, that's not really necessarily what you're into. You're just like, hey, I'll play this, use my resources to like just keep staying alive, and eventually this will kill you. This feels like the sort of thing, and frankly with triple blood, generally with things that like, heal you and yada yada, really wants to be like a Renethel card. It's like a win condition for a deck that like, I just want the game to keep going, right? The longer the game goes, the more damage you're taking from this. If you don't have like a hero power that's gaining you life, or like some massive way to gain armor and health or whatever, it's just like burn you. Brand this, okay, take 6 a turn. Brand this, Zola this, play this, Zola, brand Zola. Yeah, it's gonna burn them out. Obviously, it's not like, something that ends the game right away, but it is sort of an inevitable win condition that you kind of want in a heavy control style strategy, and that is what heavy blood wants to be. Next up, we have Tomb Guardians. Summon 2/2 zombies with taunt, spend 4 corpses to give them a reborn. So this is kind of a combination of payoff and fuel for corpses. If you don't have the corpses and you just need the bodies, great. You get to get your thriller on. But if you have the corpses to spend, then they actually will do the dance and reborn and come back. But yeah, I think this is likely to be a powerful card in lots of different heavy Unholy decks. Triple Unholy will likely want this because, it is not only, again, a great way to generate corpses, but also to spend corpses. and can keep you alive because they're reborn taunts. So pretty difficult for a lot of things to punch through them efficiently. Certainly really bad against stuff like Deathborn, though. Next up, we have Asphyxiate. 3 costs, destroy the highest attack enemy minion. There's a lot of removal that we've seen in Blood. We've seen the 6 damage lifesteal. We've seen Obliterate. We've seen this. So clearly Blood, very heavy control, lots of tools. And it'll be interesting to see what options that people decide to go with when they do decide to play a blood heavy strategy, because depending on what the threats are in the current metagame, you might want different things. This is a deadly shot that kind of always hits the thing you want. Not necessarily true, because maybe the thing you want is like a peasant and they have something with 3 power in play or whatever, but does have certainly the potential to at least allow you to have removal that doesn't cost you life, which is something that can't necessarily be said for all of it. But yeah, overall, I think this is likely to be a pretty solid card. We'll see a decent chunk of play. If anything, I imagine that this will see more play because Renethal decks will be pretty popular as blood decks. And, you'll have more room for various forms of removal. And it will be, again, interesting to see like what the removal choices are based on how the metagame shapes up. If, there's a lot of individual large minions, this is obviously great. Whereas something like Obliterate is going to cost you a bunch of life and it's going to be less effective. If there's, a bunch of aggro decks, then the lifesteal thing is probably better than either this or Obliterate. So interesting combinations to figure out what exactly you want. Next up, we have Noxious Cadaver. 1 cost 1/2 Blood Rune. Battlecry, deal 2 damage to an enemy and to your hero. So we talked about this, quite a bit already. Blood, lots of ways to restore its life. So you don't really have to worry at least too much about, getting the damage on you. But this is at least a relatively cheap thing. Most of what we've talked about with Blood has been, more expensive stuff. And this being a removal spell that's also a body can also generate corpses for you. So if you are looking for, more early game plays and you're looking for things that also will be able to fuel your things that do use corpses in blood, because maybe you're playing heavy blood and don't necessarily have access to unholy stuff, this can be something that actually kind of fits into both of those categories. Next up, we have Army of the Dead. Costs double unholy, raise up to 5 corpses as 2/2 risen ghouls with rush. So basically, this is spend 5 corpses, make that many 2/2 risen ghouls with rush. I think the wording is just, raise up to, because, well, it's more flavorful, but still pretty clear as to what it does. This feels very powerful, right? You can generate a board of 5 2/2 minions that have rush to immediately either have just a board presence or to wipe out your opponent's board. So it does feel like it is a kind of like a mini scale of Onyxia, right? This is something that we have seen similar effects that cost 7. Obviously not quite as high impact and does have the prerequisite, but Scale of Onyxia, super strong. And again, this is the sort of thing that they are risen ghouls, so they won't give you the corpses back, but they will help fuel stuff like infuse effects, whether it's a Famished Fool or Denathrius. I do expect Denathrius to see a lot of play in Undead Death Knight decks, and this card is certainly a pretty powerful reason why. Next up, we have Unholy Frenzy. Choose an enemy minion, your minions attack it. Resummon any that die. So this is a really interesting card. We have seen Devouring Swarm in Hunter. Devouring Swarm costs 0, so obviously a lot more efficient there in that method. But this is resummon any that die rather than put them in your hand. And this is obviously at its best with things that are not like Battlecry effects, things that have perhaps Death Rattle effects. The fact that this can give you, additional copies of your minions, again, Death Rattles, or their just corpses, which are very valuable, does seem quite powerful. So this is the sort of thing that does require there to be medium to large size enemy minions to have any kind of meaningful effectiveness. But does seem like, in the right context with, say, the Battlecry Death Rattle draw card guy. Maybe you play this alongside that guy with the Reborn plus Death Rattle, so you get multiple triggers of all that stuff. A lot of things that do feel like it can be very, very powerfully synergistic with. Only a single Unholy Rune as well. So it can go into a lot of decks that can potentially have a wide variety of different ways to abuse it. Speaking of death rattles, Yimijar, I'm never going to pronounce this correctly, Yimijar Deathbringer, 3-cost 3/3 taunt. Death rattle, spend 3 corpses to summon a 3/3 risen Yimijirgar with taunt. So, this can potentially be like, hey, boom, I attack this guy into your guy, along with these other things. Hey, look, we get a death rattle, we get this one back, and we get the death rattle of another guy. So this is a very powerful card. You're getting a 3-cost 3/3 with death rattle, make another 3-cost 3/3 taunt with death rattle, make another 3-cost 3/3 taunt. Just assuming you have the corpses just to justify it. And this is double Unholy. Unholy, again, has so many ways to generate corpses. Because the death rattle, it is a death rattle effect, my guess is that if you have 2 corpses going into when this dies, you'll get the corpse from this dying, and then it'll reanimate as well. So definitely a very powerful tempo way that you can take advantage of corpses, and that is something that, Unholy obviously has lots of ways to enable. Next up, we have Remorseless Winter. Deal 2 damage to all enemies, draw a card. Just a pretty straightforward, powerful AoE tool for only 1 Frost Rune. So, this could go into, obviously, the Frost spell combo style things, or into, basically any deck that wants to dip into Frost at all. Basically, compare this to, Consecrate, right? Consecration, boom, 2 damage. This, 2 damage, draw a card. You get a lot more when you're playing a new class. Not that Consecration has been a card that really has seen a ton of play for a while now, but does go to show, that some of the old cards, they aren't what they used to be. But this, I don't think this is just a card that goes into every deck. Obviously, very metagame dependent. This is a very strong card in a world of lots of things like imps and whatnot, but obviously a lot weaker when you are looking at ramp decks, control decks, things like that. But bare minimum, it draws a card, and it damages all enemies, so that includes the opponent. So certainly hard to go too wrong with that one. Next up, Frost Strike. A 2-cost Frost spell, 2 Frost Runes, deal 3 damage to a minion. If that kills it, discover a Frost Rune card. So this is likely to be a pretty staple card in Frost decks. We mentioned before, a lot of the Frost decks do care a great deal about sort of this spell synergies, although we haven't really gotten to a lot of the payoffs just yet. But just kill something, discover a new card, really powerful effect, right? Especially, again, if you are playing a deck that does care specifically about those spell synergies, being able to generate more things that can, help feed into those synergies, just is a very, very strong effect. Next up, Defrost, a 2-cost Frost card. Draw a card, spend 2 corpses, draw another. So a 2-cost draw a card, obviously not super strong. 2-cost, draw 2 cards, very strong. We have seen Arcane Intellect still gets played many years later. We were talking about how some cards get creeped out of existence. AI, not one of those. So something that is potentially more efficient than AI, if you do have the corpses to support it, going to be very strong. Talked a lot about how you want things that work with the Frost spell synergies and such. Well, say you have this and the death rattle to copy them, you could just get so many card draw effects off of your individual hand. Certainly strong. Again, I expect that something like this is more likely to see play in a Frost Unholy than anything else, just because of the rune generation. It is only a single Frost rune, so does have a lot of places it can fit. Does seem like it is likely to be the most common in that Frost Unholy deck. Next up, Corrupted Ashbringer. I've seen a lot of people who are like, oh, this is such a bad card. And they're really crazy. This is a 6-cost 5/2 lifesteal weapon. This is, if you're playing a deck that is looking to play control, this kills 2 big minions, or mid-sized minions, and probably costs you no life. If this is, something you're hitting your opponent with, this is 10 damage, gain 10 life for 6 mana. I just feel like this is a way better card than the commentary that I have seen would have you believe. People really undervalue the lifesteal here. I mean, consider the original Death Knight for Paladin, right? The original Uther of the Ebon Blade. A significant portion of the power of that card was the fact that it could help you really sustain with the lifesteal weapon that you got. And I get that there are some complaints that it's like, how is Corrupted Ashbringer a common card that isn't, cool and exciting? That I don't really have much commentary on. I could see that definitely from a lore perspective, this should be something different than it is. I'll buy that argument, but I don't really have a strong opinion on it. But I do think that from the perspective of like this card's power level, I think a lot of commentators so far that I have seen are very, very wrong. I think that, this is the sort of card that, say you're playing a deck that uses your life as a resource. Well, this is 10 life and 10 damage. If you're playing a deck with, say the Mograine that just wants the game to, go long and bring your opponent to death. Well, this is additional damage to them and additional life for you. That can keep you alive long enough for that burn to kill them. So, I think this is a totally fine card. The Paladin Libram weapon, for instance, saw play. Obviously, that could get reduced really low with the Librams and such, but this can get reduced with the Rune shaping or whatever it is, and just be a 5-cost, lifesteal 5-power weapon. Just seems like it's a lot better than people are giving it credit for, because people really undervalue the impact of lifesteal in something like this. Speaking of lifesteal, Gnome Muncher. 6-cost 5/6 taunt lifesteal. At the end of your turn, attack the lowest health enemy. So one thing that's really important to note about this card, this says enemy. This does not say minion. So if you are playing a heavy control deck and you kill your opponent's stuff, well, this is just a lifesteal charge minion, right? Like this just hits them and gains you life and is still a taunt. If this is, you're playing against an aggressive deck. Boom, you play this, it eats your opponent's minion, gains you some life, they have to attack into it, gain you some life again. So, I think that this is a really powerful looking card to me. Obviously, it can be really bad if everyone has like one big minion. It can go real wrong. But, I think that this is something that has, definitely a very, very high potential to really swing games with the combination of effects that it has attached to it. Next up, we have Grave Strength. Triple Unholy. Give your minions +1 attack. Pretty bad, right? Spend 5 corpses to give them +3 instead. So obviously, Unholy about creating swarms of undead. And you got a bunch of corpses laying around. Okay, well, +3 to my entire board. Pretty powerful finisher. Bonelust, yeah. This is basically a permanent Bloodlust effect, right? Obviously, you need the 5 corpses to fuel it. It's cheaper than Bloodlust, but it sticks around. So if you have, just a bunch of dopey undead minions, boom, buff them up, get you. And this feels like a pretty powerful effect. Definitely the sort of thing that a swarm undead, unholy style deck is interested in. It certainly seems like the sort of card that can see a great deal of play as a finisher for those decks. Obviously, you look at this and compare what you get here to what you get with some of the other corpse expenditures. This isn't nearly as impactful, but because Unholy is the rune type that has the easiest time generating corpses, this is not going to be nearly as impactful as some of the other triple rune cards that don't have quite as easy access to corpse generation. Speaking of triple rune cards, Vampiric Blood. So 2 cost. Gain 5 health. Pretty medium, but spend 3 corpses to gain 5 more and draw a card. So if you have 3 corpses available, this is 2 cost, gain 10 health, draw a card. That's a lot. It is max health. Not just heal 5, gain 5 health. So if you are playing Renathal with triple blood and you play Vampiric Blood twice, you have 60 max health. That's pretty tanky. You're just a blood bag, right? That is what I expect to be probably the most popular, most common of blood Death Knight decks, triple blood at least, is going to be Renathal, like, hey, I have 60 health, just try and kill me decks. So that feels really exciting to me. I am stoked to try and build that sort of deck, and just bleed my opponent dry, keep life stealing up. Like, oh, you wanna Denathrius me to death? Go ahead, try it. I have 60 health. And I have Patchwork and Mutinous. I'm going to eat that. Give it a shot. Anyway, really powerful card. Definitely archetype defining right here. I expected to see a lot of play. Next up is Blood Tap. Give all minions in your hand +1/+1. Spend 3 corpses to give them +1/+1 more. Another of the blood directions, we talked about the hand buff. This one does buff their health, And this can be 2 cost. Give all minions in your hand +1/+1. Again, I talked earlier about this. You really need to have minions that can benefit very well from the buffs in order for spending the time and resources and cards to buff your hand to be worth it. This is very much a card that you need to have rush minions, you need to have taunt minions, you need to have minions that care about specifically their stats, that copy themselves in order for something like this to be valuable. So I so far have not really seen enough that makes me feel like I would want to play a hand buff style Death Knight deck. But certainly worth keeping our eyes open as we see more cards in the neutrals, which are all available, but I haven't looked at yet, or just future cards. But speaking of things that are good to buff, Nerubian Swarm Guard. Pretty clear from the existence of this card that the hand buff stuff is going to want to be Blood, Unholy, right? This is the best thing. It is a taunt minion that summons copies of itself. So, if you have the corpses with the last one, and you buff up your hand, and you have this guy in your hand, you get 3 copies of 3/5 chance. So triple Senjin, boom. Obviously that's pretty strong. That's not like a game-winning thing outside of against like a lot of aggro decks that don't have reach, and it requires a significant amount of setup. Maybe that gets us there. Maybe that ends up being strong enough, but I feel like we need a bit more than that combination to justify building our deck around that. So yeah, certainly some potential there, but I think likely needs some more support before it feels like it's worth building a deck around. Next up, we have another triple Frost card, Frostworm's Fury. 7 cost, deal 5 damage, freeze all enemy minions, summon a 5/5 Frostworm. So this is, Frost Nova you, Fireball you, make a 5/5. Certainly a powerful effect. Does need there to be a metagame where your opponent is largely reliant on board in order to be effective. Going to be a fairly weak card against ramp control. 5 damage, make a 5/5 is still like okay at least, but is that worth 7? Probably not. It's kind of like a Firelance Portal, basically, right? That was a powerful card. This has the freeze all enemy minions attached to it. It is triple Frost. So it does lock you out of a lot of the other powerful things that do exist in the class. But, in minion-based matchups where you're at all racing, this is completely nuts. But against again, control or combo style decks, it is likely to be a lot weaker. Next up, we have Malignant Horror. 2/4 Reborn. At the end of your turn, spend 5 corpus to summon a copy of this minion. This is a very interesting one. This is pretty clearly, at its best in Unholy, because, it eats corpses. But it's a reborn minion that copies itself. So it is pretty difficult for your opponent to clear this, because it is each of these that copies is then 2 minions that give you corpses. It does feel like you really need to like hand buff this. This is the sort of thing that maybe this goes into that deck we were talking about as something you can hand buff up. Obviously the hand buffs will not apply to the reborn versions, but having the initial body you play, hey, I +2/+2'd this, I gave it plus attack with my 3/2 guy on 2, so suddenly I have like a 7/6 that copies itself when I play it, and even if you AoE, well, I have a couple of 2/1s around in order to keep the pressure on. It feels like it could be pretty good. So maybe this is enough to keep the fuel going with the hand buff style, because it does copy itself completely, but we shall see. Next up is Horn of Winter. So I talked a little bit about the Frost combo stuff that does exist. This is obviously a pretty heavy component of that, the ability to play like spell tempo. It is refresh, not generate, so you can't ramp with this, right? This can never allow you to play like a 6-drop on turn 4. This will let you play a 4-drop and a 2-drop. Very powerful card. Obviously, you need to have a deck that is capable of generating a lot of extra cards in order to justify playing cards that don't really do anything independently. But certainly do expect this to see a lot of play, be a heavy component of what makes the Frost decks powerful, because of their ability to get additional tempo off of those additional free mana crystals, especially if they are able to copy this and generate massive amounts of extra mana. More mana cheating. Glacial Advance. Deal 4 damage, your next spell this turn costs 2 less. So, again, if you're looking to chain spells together, this is a way to do that. It is deal 4 damage to anything not just against a minion like many of the spells that we've seen before. It does seem like there are the tools to make like an Auctioneer Frost deck, right? Between this and Horn of Winter, lots of things that enable you to play spells for cheap or free that can allow you to make those sort of chains going on. So I do expect this, in the spell combo style decks to be a staple alongside Horn of Winter to enable you to have these sort of multi-spell turns. Soul Breaker, a 3-cost 3/2 weapon, 1 blood. After your hero attacks and kills a minion, gain 2 corpses. So we talked about how the corpse generation in blood is not necessarily great. This is a way that in a blood deck you can turn your opponent's minions into corpses for you. 3-cost 3/2, obviously pretty ineffective weapon stats. It's the nerfed Fire War Axe stats. Most of the 3-cost 3/2s that we see tend to have pretty powerful abilities attached to them. This one is questionable. Obviously, depends on the metagame whether there's a lot of things you can attack and kill with this. But again, the corpse generation from blood, wanting to be able to play stuff like Vampiric Blood, be able to ensure that you have access to those in a timely fashion. This is a, in the right metagame, great way to potentially enable those cards. And Corpse Explosion. Speaking of powerful ways to spend corpses, holy cow. Detonate a corpse to deal 1 damage to all minions. If any are still alive, repeat this. So if you have a lot of corpses, this just kills everything. And it not only kills everything, it kills everything that death rattles out of those things. Or reborns out of those things, because it keeps going. I think this is super powerful. This is like probably the most powerful corpse spending card there is, because it's effectively 5-cost kill everything. It is only double blood, so you can play this alongside Unholy. So double blood Unholy allows you to, have stuff like Graveyard Shift that generates a lot of corpses. But yeah, it is very similar to a bad math Defile. It is like, hey, I'm going to kill everything as long as I have enough corpses. And it does, keep, like, if you have things that die to this, those will generate corpses that will fuel this, right? So it is a lot easier to use on a board full of big minions than something like a Defile would be, or medium-sized minions or whatever else. So, if you have enough corpses, you just kill literally everything. Probably not great against something like Bless Priest, where they have, like, 20 health minions, but against just about anything else, this should be a 5-cost board clear much of the time. So very, very powerful card. I anticipate this being one of the major board clears that does get played in the controlling Death Knight decks. That's it. That's every card. A lot of really, really cool stuff in Death Knight. I am really excited to try, especially the Blood and Unholy rune styles really appeal to me. I like playing, decks that play a lot to the board and get to, utilize resources that you don't normally utilize, like Unholy does. I like playing grindy control type decks alongside, things that keep me alive longer, like Blood has. Frost, I think there's a lot of cool stuff that will definitely appeal to other people. I'm not really much of a spell combo style player. It doesn't really jive with the kind of games that I like to play, but I am really excited to check out all of what we have to offer in the Death Knight class. I am super excited for the really interesting deck building that feels like Death Knight has to offer with the rune system. As I said at the beginning, I've always felt like Hearthstone really lacked in complexity in deck building and didn't really have that much granularity and nuance in terms of being able to play things that have trade-offs, right? I come from Magic the Gathering, which has a mana system that allows you, hey, you can try playing all these cards, but then you might not be able to play them when you want to because of the mana system. But the rune system, really makes those trade-offs, I think, cool and interesting, and I'm really excited to explore it when March of the Lich King does release on December 6th. So thank you all very much for watching, and let me know what you think of Death Knight, and I will get to the rest of the cards from March of the Lich King when they are all finally revealed. So very excited for Death Knight, very excited for the new expansion, and I hope you all are too. See you then.